Today we're going to take a look at hinges and how to keep them lubricated. When you open your gate, does it sound like this? Well, if it does, that's a sure sign that your hinges need to be lubricated. And we're going to look at how to do that today. One of the easiest ways to lubricate a hinge is to use one of these spray lubricants, like this WD-40 can. WD-40 is a great lubricant to use because it lubricates the hinge and reduces the friction, thereby eliminating the squeak. The disadvantage of WD-40 is that it doesn't last a long time, so you may have to do this a couple times a year, but it is a great one because it lubricates well and it displaces any water that's in there and helps repel any water from getting in there. All of that will help prevent the fastener from rusting, so your hinge should be squeak free for at least a few months with using this WD-40. So I'm going to go ahead and spritz some of this into the hinge here. And then I'm just going to move the hinge back and forth to spread the lubricant all around inside of there. And as you can see, it's already stopped the squeaking even though I've just applied it. So I'm going to spray it in there, work it around, and then I'll give it a second coat and spray it around. And it's a good idea to keep a paper towel on the backside just to catch any of the overspray. Just since I have one hand on the camera and one hand on the cam, I can't do that. And here's another hinge variety. Again, just spray some of the WD-40 on it. And the WD-40 will both help prevent water from getting in there and lubricate the hinge. And here I've got a third variety of hinge. So again, we'll just put some WD-40 in there, and then I'll work the gate back and forth just to make sure that the lubricant spreads itself around inside of that hinge. And by going around all of your fences or any of the other hinges you have in your house, you can just do routine maintenance on them, keep them working in tip-top shape. The next hinge we're going to tackle is a door hinge. So most doors in your house are going to have 3 of these types of hinges, and they have all these little barrels here, and then they have a pin that rides through them. If your door has 3 hinges, it's probably okay to pop one hinge off without doing much to the door. I'll show you that in a second. If your door only has 2 hinges, it's a good idea to find some wedge. Oftentimes your house, you'll have a doorstop somewhere around. I have this funky looking frog one, and it's a good idea to pop one of those door stoppers up under the corner of your door, and that'll just prop it up so that the weight of the door isn't bearing down on only one hinge. So it's a good idea to just support some of the weight. This is a very simple way of doing it. I thought I'd just show you how to do it in case you weren't sure what I was talking about. Just prop the wedge up under the door, and that will hold the weight off of the door so that when you go to take the hinge out, it's not putting undue stress on the other hinge. We're ready to go ahead and pop the hinge pin out of the hinge right now. And they make these specialty tools that'll get in there and pop the hinge out. But you could just as easily use a pin punch, or even if you don't have one of those, you can use a nail as well. So just any kind of pin that'll get in there and knock the hinge pin out. I'll just show you the specialty tool one first. You just line that up, pop it with your hammer, and it will drive the pin right out of the hinge. And these are just kind of nice because they protect you from hitting anything errantly with the hammer. But you could just as easily use a pin punch here. Now this is a good time to note that this hinge pin is put in upside down, and I don't know why the previous person did that. You will find that occasionally, but it's not the right way to do it. The hinge pin should be from the top going down so that it cannot fall out. It's not really a big deal. It's not really a safety factor, but just probably a better way to do it is to put it in from the top. Once you get the hinge pin to where it's almost out completely, you should just be able to pull it right out. And usually it'll just pop right out. If you're having trouble with it, an easy way is to grab it with a pair of needle nose pliers right by the hinge top of the pin and just tap it with a mallet until it comes out. The main thing that you want to avoid is that this hinge pin should be super smooth and it should not have any scratches in it. And if you get in there and start grabbing it with a pair of pliers, you could put little scratches in there and ding it up. So just be careful when you do this. You want to grab it right at the top. And so I'm not really squeezing on the pin, but more or less I'm just grabbing the top of it and then slightly knocking it out with the hammer. With the pin out of the way, I can now go ahead to the next steps. And the first thing that's going to happen is I'm just going to wipe this pin down, make sure I get any grease, dirt, and grime off of it. Check for any rough spots. If there's any rough spots, it might be a good idea to take some light sandpaper and just sand them out. This one's smooth, so I don't have to worry about that. So the next thing we need to do is lubricate this. And I showed you before that you could use WD-40 to lubricate a lot of things, and you still could use WD-40 for this. But since it's inside and it's not going to deal with a lot of weather, you know, water, moisture, extreme temperatures, dirt, things like that, I'm going to actually use a grease. You want to make sure that you use a heavy duty grease, one that's thick. We don't want something that's runny and will run out and stain the floor or carpeting or something like that. You want a heavy grease. And I'm just going to pull out a little grease here. You're going to use only a tiny little amount and just put a little bit on the pin, and that's plenty, and just wipe the rest off. Now, I want a very, very thin coat of this grease on here because, again, I don't want it to run out. I don't want it to get on the carpet. I don't want it to get anywhere. And the more extra dirt, more extra grease that this has, the more dirt it's going to attract. So I've wiped off almost all of it and just leave a very light skim coat all the way around this little hinge pin here. When I took this pin out before, I had to drive it out down below. Most of you guys will drive it out upwards, and that's how you'll replace it. So I'm going to put it in the right way now, and I'm going to drop it in like so. Sometimes you're going to need to adjust the door a little bit just to make sure that these hinge barrels all line up perfectly. Again, you don't want to force things. You don't want to be a bam bam. You just want to make sure everything lines up nice and neat, and just tap it in to where it just falls into place. If it doesn't fall into place, it's because these things aren't perfectly lined up, and you just need to take a little bit of time and line those things up. And sometimes it's easier to pull on the door a little bit as you do it and get those things all perfectly lined up. Since it's pretty hard to do with one hand. Oh, there we go. Just make sure everything's all lined up. Yeah. Take your time, do it right. And then the very end of the hinge, we'll just need a tap or two to seat it in all the way. Once you've got it back in and it's all tight, you've done a great job and you can congratulate yourself. Just keep going around to any other hinges that need to be lubricated. It's a good idea to do this once a year just to make sure all of your hardware stays in good shape and that it doesn't wear out. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.